and welcome to the Talent Gap Fireside Chat, where we talk about causes of and solutions to the talent gap. I'm your host, Pete Strauss, and joining me today is Courtney Hans. Courtney is a Director of Information Security and Business Technology at CareRev. Welcome, Courtney.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Well, thanks for being on, and always appreciate a good referral. I think we know some of the same people. So, but could you give our audience a little background on yourself and your career thus far?
Yeah, absolutely. I am a multi-time career transitioner. I'm a big fan of building a career pyramid instead of a career ladder, and that's what I've done. I started my career off back when I was just in my 20s as an adventure travel guide, leading biking and hiking vacations all over the world with a company called Backroads. And so really gave me the opportunity to be exposed to a variety of really driven individuals and really interesting careers. I had everyone from undertakers and firefighters to owners of their own businesses, CEOs, lawyers, doctors, all sorts of things. So great career survey. I loved it. If you had asked me then how well being an adventure guide prepared me for a career in cybersecurity, I never would have believed you, but more on that later, I'm sure. After a while, I realized that I would like to do something beyond just 99% of travel, maybe have a dog or a plant or a partner or something like that. And so I started to think about what was next for me and decided that I had a lot of applicable and transferable skills, which is really a theme for me. And I didn't have the best vocabulary for how to expand upon that to hiring managers myself. So I made a choice to go back to business school, went to UC Davis Graduate School of Management, got my MBA. And that was really helpful to put a vocabulary to a lot of the things I had already learned in my 20s, and certainly to expand my knowledge of the business world. So I did that and graduated in 2009, which if anyone was looking for a job at that time, they will remember what the job market looked like then. Fortunately, though, I found myself moving into quite a number of roles that had to do with experiential products. So the wine industry, the outdoor industry, operations side of adventure travel, which was great. And I did that in a couple of spots and landed at REI for the REI headquarters for about 7-8 years or so in a variety of different roles. Again, still in that experiential product space. I was on the adventure travel side. I worked in a small entrepreneurial unit, helping the co-op explore new business ventures and opportunities, sort of the tender off the cruise ship. And then I moved into a marketing role for some time. And then it was 2020, which we all still, it's real fresh in our memories there. And found myself as part of a large workforce reduction at REI and looking for something new. And then became my third major career pivot. I enrolled into a boot camp program, a school called Code Fellows. I'm a huge fan of them. I actually am teaching for them now as well. So I started to work with Code Fellows, and I actually started in their software development boot camp before I pivoted into their cybersecurity and operations program. Dove into that for some number of months, and relevant to what we're talking about today, really started hitting up my network hard, just celebrating my new transition, what I was learning, how excited I was about it. And through that, I was able to really build up quite a few connections in the space. So when it came time for me to look for a new job in my new chosen field, I had folks that knew I had pivoted, and they knew that I brought a lot of transferable skills because they'd been following my journey. I talked about that a lot. And so a few days after I finished the program, I had a conversation with my first boss in the cybersecurity space. He's like, "Hey, I need you to work on security over here at CareRev." And so we had a discussion, and I became security hire number one, a growing software as a service company. And from there, and that was, so January of 2021, I built up the security function and strategy and teams at CareRev, took on the IT function, and then most recently in the last month or two or so, have also taken on the business technology function as well. So it's got me in a really interesting and exciting spot where I'm able to look at the intersection of our technology, pretty much everything beyond our actual product that we're building, although I look at that too, but on the business technology side, on the IT side, of course, supporting all of that for our users within the organization. And then, of course, on the security side, where I work on everything from user, not just me, my team, of course, user education, application security, third-party risk management, enterprise risk assessment and appetite, governance, risk, and compliance, which I personally love. And I love it. I love the startup life where I get to try on a lot of different hats and work with a lot of really interesting and engaged people. And that's my TED Talk about where I've been.
That's a great story. And I mean, you've done a lot, it seems like, very quickly with a small organization like that. And I often tell folks that are looking to break into the industry, try and go work for a smaller company when you first try to break in. One, they're more likely to hire you because there's less competition for those smaller companies. And two, as you had mentioned, you wear a lot of hats and you get kind of thrown to the wolves in a lot of cases, which, while challenging, it can be a really good learning experience. And you develop a lot of, I think, soft skills necessarily that you wouldn't necessarily in a very large team where you're only taking on one small piece of any given project.
Absolutely.
So, yeah, I mean, obviously you're a huge advocate for transferable skills. That's often something that I think a lot of hiring managers miss out on when they're hiring. I think often there's kind of a pretty narrow focus when it comes to what the ideal candidate looks like.
Mm-hmm.
There's a sense that, we only want to hire people from a direct competitor or somebody who's, held this exact job title before. Any advice, I guess, to the hiring managers out there that think they need that person to fill that exact seat that's held that title before and done that job before? I guess, could you make a case for somebody like yourself? Like, how would you justify that from a business standpoint?
Absolutely. I think that as a hiring manager, right, we're doing ourselves disservice when we take too narrowly a focused view of a role, right? Like it's our natural tendencies, I think, to post for our unicorn. Like I would love to have, this laundry list of 45 different things and 12 different certifications. And some folks have the luxury of working with a recruiter. Some folks, it's really more managing themselves. But I'd say it's okay to post for your unicorn, but be deliberate about that language. Like you might have maybe a very short list of requirements, maybe, 3, 4, 5 things possibly. And then you could have a longer list of like, hey, these are some things we might consider that might bring in some more interesting candidates. It might, there's a lot of conversation around how women, especially, or people that don't identify as men, will look at a job posting, and if they do not hit 100% of the requirements, won't even apply. Whereas maybe like someone who identifies as male might look at it and be like, well, I got like 45%, sure, I'll give it a go. So you're closing yourself off to some candidates who might think your requirements are more rigid than they truly are. But have a good discussion if you are working with a recruiter about like, hey, again, unicorn posting. If somebody fits, 60% of the criteria, I'd like to talk to them. If somebody's coming from another industry, I'd like to talk to them, because in security, I don't think I'm saying anything groundbreaking here, but the more diversity we bring to the table, and that includes, ethnic, gender, all diversity in all sets of the word, but specifically for me, diversity of experience. I have leaned extremely heavily upon my experiences in my other jobs, my ability to speak to executive stakeholders, to non-technical audiences, and that helps me do my job so much better. And that's also what I'm looking at as a hiring manager. So beyond just the posting and good discussions with your recruiter about what you're looking for, in your hiring questions or in your circuit, I suppose, make sure you're leaving a lot of space for getting to know your candidate and their non-technical skills. And even I do it all this time. Like if I'm being careless, I'll refer to them as soft skills, but I think that diminishes their importance. I think that pretty much anyone has the ability to learn tech. And no matter, we're always learning new things at our job. We might be the best thing at XYZ. And then you go to a new company and they do XYZ, but they do it just a little bit differently. You're always going to have a learning curve. Any new person's going to have a learning curve at a new job. So as a hiring manager, beyond the technical pieces, which are great, but very, maybe not easily learnable, but more straightforward to learn, dive in, ask the questions, the behavioral questions. Tell me about a time when you had to work with a difficult stakeholder. Tell me about a time that you had a conflict. Tell me about a time that you had to implement a project that you weren't a fan of, something like that. Ask about how they deal with adversity. Ask about how they connect with other people. Because again, the technical pieces are just one small part. The non-technical pieces, pieces that career transitioners may, not just career transitioners, but certainly those can have from their prior experience, can bring so much more depth and robustness to a security program, and give them opportunity to explore. You might have some candidates that are like, I'm all about threat hunting. That's what I want to do. That's my specialty. If it's not threat hunting, I'm not interested in it. But you may have other candidates that are like, this is what I've been learning. This is where I want to grow. In fact, that's a question that I always ask as a hiring manager. What are you learning right now? And I don't care if the answer is, I'm learning Splunk, or, I'm learning to get more adept with my command line. They could tell me that they're learning to crochet. That's fine. I just want to know that they're really interested and passionate about continuous learning, because that's the sort of person that I'd like to bring on. And I think we do ourselves a disservice as hiring managers when we're looking for someone to come in knowing all this stuff. You're going to get a much more engaged team member when you give them room to grow and you hire people that are hungry to grow. That's a really long-winded answer.
Yeah, no, that's great. And you kind of echo a lot of sentiments that I hear from a lot of hiring managers. There's a lot of talk about passion and soft skills and intangibles and stuff like that. I got to thinking, not everybody's going to have those soft skills. And, somebody could be very technically savvy, be very smart, maybe could be coached on those soft skills. So, especially at the entry level, I think there's already such a huge oversupply of people trying to break into the field that I think hiring managers can be a little bit choosier, and they can select the folks that are more polished and eloquent and stuff like that. But what do we do with the folks that maybe they're bright in a lot of different ways, but they're not as polished on the communication front? Like, do you think that can be trained, or, what role do they serve in any given organization, and how can we justify hiring the people that show promise, but not necessarily in the soft skills arena?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that there's a number of things in there. I think for folks, if there's an awareness, like if you're out there and you are like, man, I'm so technically competent, but I don't think I interview very well. That is absolutely a skill that can be maybe not perfected. I don't know that I've ever walked out of an interview going, yeah, I crushed it. That was perfect. But definitely a skill that can be worked upon and improved. But it's really hard to do that in a vacuum. That is, you might have to put yourself out there to speak with mentors, right? We talk a lot in the community about reaching out and connecting with people and seeking out a mentor. And I think a lot of folks might take that as, maybe I need to connect with someone who can tell me more about how to become this thing that I want to become, focusing on technical skills. But I would encourage folks to do more informational interviews and do more practice interviews. If you are going to a program, a university program, a boot camp, look for one that has that pays some attention to career topics, to the soft skills as well. That's, like I said, interviewing, presenting to a diverse audience, negotiation even, and negotiation not just in terms of compensation, but negotiation and like, how do I come to the table, right? With security almost always, I could probably say always, security works on this like sliding scale of convenience and sacrifice, right? Like the more convenient it is, the probably less secure it is, and vice versa. And so negotiation is a good example, I think, of a soft skill that people think is only applicable to a compensation discussion, but it actually comes into my daily work when I talk with, business side stakeholders about security controls that I might want to put in place that need to also account for business objectives. But sorry, back to your soft skills question. Find people who can be, your interviewer. Just do a practice interview every now and then. Even when I am not looking for jobs, I will, or even if I'm not an active candidate, I will still often seek to put myself in an interview situation. Could be something like this, could be something like a job possibility, could be a presentation situation, so that I can keep working on those skills. And that's what I would encourage candidates to do as well. And if you can't find somebody in the space, like your buddy can interview you. There's no reason that you can't prepare a set of questions that you think might come up in an interview and ask a friend to interview you. Ask a friend to video interview you. Ask a friend to live interview or just phone, because there are different ways that we all interact in various mediums, and practice that, because it is not a natural skill for a lot of folks. And on the hiring manager side, have grace for candidates. Some people interview really well. Some people interview extremely poorly. But if you are asking the right questions and setting the stage for their comfort, that can really help. I've had interviews on the hiring side where in my head, I'm thinking, wow, this person is really not a great interviewer, but they can clearly do this job. I think they're nervous. I think this, this is not their favorite activity to engage upon. And I can park that and ask the questions that will help illuminate if they'll be able to do their job. And that was a role that, actually wasn't going to be interfacing with a lot of non-technical folks. So I didn't need them to be the best at speaking to non-technical folks with technical speak. So yeah, for hiring managers, have grace when people, that's a really nerve-wracking situation for most people. So think about that. Do your best to put them at ease. Do, like what you've done, Pete, is that this is a conversation. That's how I start all my interviews. Like, this is not meant to be a grill so that I find a reason to say no to you. This is meant for us to both discuss what we're looking for out of this situation. It's just as important for candidates that I talk to vet my environment and myself, to see if this is a situation they want to put themselves in, as it is for me. So set the stage and make sure that they feel comfortable speaking up, asking for clarification, asking their own questions. The more conversational you can make an interview, I think the more you can put people at ease and let them shine through. And then for those folks that are looking for a job, find ways to practice those soft skills, seek those out, put a post up on LinkedIn asking if anyone would be willing to be, ask a stranger if they'd be willing to put themselves in their, an interviewer's shoes and give you some candid feedback. And then above all, be open to that feedback. It's hard to hear critiques of our soft skills because they feel so much more personal than critiques of our hard skills. But you've got to be open to that. And that can be really challenging, to not feel defensive and want to come back with like, well, I think they're wrong, or I thought I did great. Like, just sit and listen with it. You don't have to agree, but you do have to listen to it and take it in. His feedback is a gift.
Yeah, it's a great point. Yeah, and just a few other resources for folks that do want to work on their soft skills. So I saw a few examples of these even the last couple of weeks. One, I went to it was through meetup.com. It was a group called Tampa Bay Techies, and that's a new group that they just started. And basically the topic, it was a panel discussion where they had some industry leaders from IT and security, and they got up there and told people best practices, how to break into the field. But there was also networking. So they were in the same room. Anybody who wanted to break into the field, they're in the same room as VPs of IT, CISOs, stuff like that. So meetup.com is a great resource. There's a ton of Discord channels out there where they actually have looking for mentor, looking for mentee sections. Mm-hmm. And to anybody curious, hit me up on LinkedIn. I can send them to you. And then, conferences that are relatively inexpensive, like B-Sides. I'm going to be speaking about how to work with recruiters at B-Sides St. Pete.
I love B-Sides.
Yeah, and did the same thing at B-Sides Tampa a while back. So there's usually like some sort of career track at any of these conferences, and B-Sides is really about the best place to go. Then online networking groups, Discord channels, subreddits. There's so many different places that you can interact with people already in the field. LinkedIn, I think sometimes you can develop soft skills just by osmosis. So spending a lot of your time on LinkedIn with people that are already in the field and are already well-spoken, you kind of absorb some of their communication style and skills just from seeing what they post and interacting with comments and posts and stuff like that. And I know sometimes it can be difficult to get started. Everybody says network, but how do you network? How do you distill that down to, couple of sentences?
It's scary for a lot of folks. Like that's a big topic that I'll cover with students that I'm working with. I'm like, yes, you might be learning, hardware networking fundamentals. That's also very, very important. But you cannot discount the importance of the human networking. And again, I'm a dyed-in-the-wool introvert. Networking is not something that comes very naturally to me. It's something that I do. I tell this to people. I was like, it's like working out in broccoli. I don't necessarily love those things, but I know they're good for me. But the beautiful thing about LinkedIn, I love that you mentioned that, is that is, it feels like, this is my experience again as an introvert, like that feels like an easier way to wade into the networking waters than just walking into a room full of people and sticking out your hand and saying, hi, I'm Courtney. Nice to meet you. Tell me your story. It feels a little bit safer, and you've got to figure out the ways that work to network for you. Like, again, for me, it's more one-on-one conversations. I'm not as comfortable in a larger group. Like, to walk up to a circle of 6 people already talking sounds terrifying to me. But I can, walk up to a person, have a conversation with one person that I've met in on LinkedIn. If I prepare a couple of questions, connect with folks on Discord servers or Slack spaces. It seems like a bit more of a manageable way to wade in. I love that you mentioned that.
Yeah, and I mean, if you get a few of those easy wins under your belt, it becomes easier to graduate to more extreme versions of
Right. You get a little momentum.
Yeah, exactly. I think a lot of folks struggle with just that first step. If everything's so intimidating and you don't really know what to do, my advice would be just take a step in any direction, and that'll be an improvement. At least you're moving then. And you start to gain momentum, like you mentioned. So.
Right. This is the networking version of like the Couch to 5K running program. Just start.
There you go. Exactly. Well, that's a great point on that. What about the talent gap itself? It's something we talk about often here on the show. Do you think the cybersecurity talent gap is a real thing? And if so, what do you think it looks like?
I do. I was just talking about this with some colleagues last night too. I don't think I'm saying anything revolutionary here either, but we've got a dearth of folks that are looking to break into the cybersecurity community and their first role. And that first role can be really challenging to get. And part of that is because I think there are some unrealistic expectations in some job requisitions that are out there for sure. Entry-level roles that are requiring a CISSP or, entry level, but it's 5 years of experience, and so I think that's getting better. I think there is starting to be more of an appreciation that we can hire at a more junior or entry level and train. So again, that's where I would encourage hiring managers to look at folks with transferable non-technical skills to complement maybe their like budding or nascent technical skill prowess. And for candidates, I would recommend, again, yes, shout out all your technical accomplishments, talk about the tools that you've been using. Remember that hobby experience, like, I've got my home lab, as I'm sure many of us do, set up, and I play around with all sorts of things. That experience is still experience. Experience is not just what you are paid to do. So make sure that you're thinking about your own experience holistically and not selling yourself short. But then you also have to connect the dots, especially those folks that are looking to transition from a new career. If you were to look at my resume a couple years ago and I'm applying to be a security analyst or something like that, that would make no sense. You'll see like marketing on my resume and project management and all sorts of things. And now I can sit here and think in my own head, oh yeah, I have all these things that can translate to the work of a security analyst. But I need to make the hiring manager's job easy by connecting those dots. I got some advice once from a career coach that said, think about the company that you're applying for. Think as if they speak French and your resume is written in Spanish. You have got to translate your resume into their language to make it easy for them. Hiring managers are busy. They can't connect all the dots for you. You have to do it for them. But on the skills gap, I think too, I still see a lot of roles posted for, more senior level or even more mid-level. And so that's a big gap, right? We've got hundreds and maybe thousands or tens of thousands of folks looking for these entry-level roles, and they're not getting in because there aren't enough. So who are we? I mean, Naomi Buckwalter talks about this all the time, and I think she's spot on. Like, who are we going to be promoting and mentoring into these mid and senior level roles? historically, it's been that people just came up, say, through IT, and as IT evolved and our systems evolved, security was seen as a need. And so those folks just sort of naturally or organically moved into more senior level roles focusing on security. And so I think there's still a lot of residual advice out there saying, like, you got to start in IT, you got to move your way up through IT. And I think that is a way. I don't think that's the only way by any stretch. Again, like GRC, very near and dear to my heart. I think that there's so many skill sets that can come into, mapping against frameworks, writing policies, looking at overall business strategy and how compliance and governance can support that. You don't really need to have a technical background. You just need to have a willingness to engage in conversation and really listen. So, but that can be a great space to be in while, say you want to ultimately be a pen tester or something like that. Now, that's a role that we see very, very few entry-level opportunities for, I think, decent reasons. But I've seen places like Rhino Security Labs, they've posted for a junior pen tester before, again, looking for someone who's got an aptitude and a hunger for learning. But my point is, you could start in a role like GRC or something like that might not be your dream cybersecurity destination, but it's a great way to get your foot in the door while you continue to get more experience and more, technical projects. So my advice to job seekers on that score would be, you don't have to be anything to everything to everybody. Like, if you put yourself out there, it's like, I'm just happy to take any job in security. That's not really helpful for hiring managers either. But be open to a variety of roles to start amassing experience. You might be surprised by what you like. You might not love it. That's okay. It doesn't have to be your forever job. You can learn from it and then move on to your next cybersecurity job closer to the pathway that you want to take. But yeah, I think too, it's on the security. I think the security community, which I've found to be socially and like network wise, extremely welcoming and open for newcomers. But those jobs still are really hard to get. And I don't think any of us have like the magic pill for that. That's just like, stay for those of us in hiring, in positions to hire. For example, I did have a woman who was on my IT team, and she had expressed quite a bit of interest in security, and she'd never studied for it or anything like that. But she shared that with me, that was where her interest was. And so then when I did have an opportunity to open up a role on the security team, talk to the other team members about what we were looking for, and collectively we all decided, hey, you know what? We'd love a junior level person that's just really interested, and we're going to have them focus on vulnerability management. Like, that's a need that we have right now. But beyond that, we're going to see where their interests are and foster that. So worked with the team to identify an opportunity for a junior level candidate, and then looked internally at someone who'd expressed interest and promoted them into that role. So that's another thing I think that organizations can really do. Take the people in your org that have that context to your business. If they're interested, give them those opportunities. So for job seekers, again, like maybe you're in a role that's non-security related, you can still use that hopefully to pivot into a security related role in your organization. You don't necessarily have to leave where you are. Look for those opportunities, but people can't read your mind. You have to express it to your boss, make connections within your company. Obviously, that's probably easier in a larger company, but express those desires and interests, shout it loud and proud. People will hopefully see your interest and your contextual awareness of the organization and operations, and give you those opportunities. But you've got to be pretty vocal about it.
Yeah, there's a lot of good threads to pull on there. First one that I kind of picked up, as you had mentioned, finding another position as a segue into, eventually becoming a pen tester. I've seen multiple people do that. And the way that they're able to do it is they went and worked for a GRC consulting firm. A barrier to entry there, very much lower. These people are profit generating for the company very quickly. In a lot of cases, there's not a whole lot of training, but they learn very fast because they're working with a ton of different clients right away. And then usually there's some relationship between getting some sort of audit done and then a pen test. So for PCI, they got to get, I think, 2 pen tests done a year now with I think it's 4.0. But yeah, that's a good example of one specific pathway for people that eventually want to be a pen tester. And often I find what causes any sort of talent gap is mismanaged expectations. There's, boot camps out there and degree programs saying, hey, just go through our boot camp, get this degree, you'll get, your $100,000 a year job. So that sets the expectation with the candidates that are looking to break into the field. Oh, well, I shouldn't settle for anything less than 100K then, when the reality on the ground is most entry-level jobs in security, they're more like 60K. So, to anybody who's job seeking, looking to break in, as you had mentioned before, definitely keep an open mind, get your foot in the door, take that first step. If you can take that first step, get some more skills under your belt, build your resume. That's the main thing you need to focus on to break into the industry, just getting that first step. However it is, if you need to go into IT, one, it pays the bills. Two, you're building valuable experience, but always be looking towards the future and not necessarily the current state. When you don't have a lot of bargaining power, sometimes you have to do something that, like you said, may not be the ideal fit for you long term, but it's a stepping stone. Career trajectories are generally pretty squiggly lines. They're not always a straight up and over. So yeah, I totally agree with what you're saying there. As a hiring manager yourself now, do you weight certs versus experience versus education, one highly or less highly?
No, I don't. I don't go in to a hiring scenario typically with weight placed on any one of those things. I think in the past I've not put any educational requirements on my job recs. I may have put, certs helpful, not required. Again, that sort of like things that we might look at but are not required kind of list. I think that leaves a lot of folks open. As for my own resume, I will put on my resume like certs that I'm currently seeking, because again, that speaks more to me wanting to express my curiosity. And I'll ask candidates often in interviews, like, are you pursuing any certifications right now? Not because I care if they have them or not, but again, back to like, what are you learning? Are you interested in lifelong learning? Because, right, just as we were just talking about, even if you land that first role in GRC or IT help desk or whatever, that's just your right now. What are you doing? You can't count on an educational institution or your organization, your employment organization, to drive your education. You have to drive that. So and again, could be crochet, could be Splunk. It's all good stuff for the brain. So no, I don't lean on that. It's been helpful to see what people have pursued and what they've gone, but that's a mixed bag too. When I'm talking to students about pursuing certifications, right? It's a lot of time and it's a lot of money to pursue these. So if you've got unlimited time and money, great. I would like to know how you found yourself in that situation. But if you don't, be discerning about which certifications you're pursuing. And there's that I think it's Paul Jeremy's website that's got the certifications mapped out, that what certifications might make sense for depending on which direction you want to go with your career and which are considered more entry level, advanced, senior, etc. And that's really helpful, I think, framework. Because if you want to be blue team all day long, then you probably don't need to go out and get your CEH or anything like that. So I might, if I were to look at a candidate and they had all sorts of offensive security certifications, but they're applying for maybe a more blue team type job, in my head, I might wonder, are they going to be happy doing more blue team type activities? But I wouldn't discount them for that. I might just talk about them because, again, like you were mentioning, making sure there aren't unarticulated assumptions or expectations. I want to make sure that, yeah, that's great. You're interested in really red teaming exercises. I'm happy to facilitate a stepping stone to that. How are we going to make sure that we're getting you what you need as an employee to get you to your ultimate career goals? But no, I think education, certifications, experience depends on what I'm looking for. I think experience would probably trump all the other pieces. But again, that doesn't have to be professional paid experience. Has that been hobbyist experience? Has that been volunteer experience? You read there's a great organization called Catch a Fire that's always looking for people to do volunteer work for nonprofits, and it's great educational experience, or just like work experience for people, and you're helping nonprofits with projects that they have. And it's could be marketing, it could be some HR project, could be a security or technical project. So look for those opportunities, because when I'm interviewing folks, what I typically like to see, if I'm asking a question, for example, about some piece of tech, I'd love to hear that they know the theory behind that tech, which can come from study for certifications, right? But you don't need to take the cert. So I want to know that they know like the theory and the tech behind this tool that I might be asking for them, or this concept, like maybe asymmetric encryption. So I want to know that they understand what we're talking about, can speak to it in a human level, that they have had experience with implementing it. Again, that could be just playing around on their home lab. And I want to know that they can connect those dots for why it would be important for an organization to use it or not use it. Like, what are the pros and cons of implementing X, Y, or Z? So that then goes back to those non-tech skills. Can you talk about why this is relevant, or why this might be a concern for an organization? If you were to I had a student once say, isn't our jobs to make sure that we are wiping out all vulnerabilities and plugging up all the holes in the dam? I'm like, well, not necessarily, because it's contextual. If we were to lock a business down, first of all, security is a state of mind. It's not an achievable goal. But if we were to lock everything down so tightly that we felt like, yeah, we are ironclad, nobody's getting to us, then the business is probably extremely hamstrung from operational efficiency. So I've gone on a wild tangent to your question, but I want someone who can think really critically and contextually about things. So that can come from cert study, from their education, from their experience. I want to know how they can talk about it. So it doesn't really matter what, at that point when we're in discussion, what's on their resume.
Yeah, makes sense. And that actually kind of brings me to a place I wanted to go anyway. I got to thinking recently about intangibles and things that people don't generally talk about that they're looking for in a candidate. And I think one of those things for me is evaluating candidates and looking for an internal locus of control versus an external locus of control. Assuming you're familiar with the concept.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was just going to say to anybody listening, basically the idea being, do people take charge of their circumstances, and do they take ownership of that, versus tending to blame somebody else if something goes bad, and only taking the credit, when they can, and being realistic about how external forces may have impacted an outcome versus your own effort or attitude, things like that. I think oftentimes toxicity that creeps its way into a team, it often occurs because there's somebody that either they feel entitled to something, or they don't take ownership of something that they messed up, and pass around blame and stuff like that. So I think when you're building a cohesive team, that internal locus of control is super important, especially for more results-oriented roles like sales or marketing, recruiting. Is this somebody who is going to overcome obstacles no matter what it takes, or are they going to just kind of give up at the first sign of adversity? So any thoughts on that, or any other sort of intangibles that you look for?
Yeah. What is their grit factor, for sure? I think once you have team members in place, to your point, like, make sure, or for me, it's really important both for me to create as a people leader, and also when I look at my leadership, do we have a culture that embraces failure? And do we walk that walk? Do we talk that talk? I had a boss once who told me at a larger organization I was at, he's like, people aren't afraid to fail here. They're afraid to fail individually. And that's why we end up having all these like decisions by consensus, which take 4 weeks to get to and 45 people to make. And that's not tenable in a startup situation. Well, I would argue it's not really tenable for a lot of situations, definitely not for a startup. Celebrate failure if you can. Like, hey, this project didn't work out. That's okay. Let's talk about it. What did we learn from it? So celebrate espouse a fail fast, learn, try again, iterate, take what you can from learning. So, ship it before it's perfect. So that's work to be done, when people are in place. But that's as a candidate, a question that I'll often ask, like, when was the last time your team failed at a project, and what did you learn from it? And I'd be looking from the hiring manager to hear, like, how do they talk about that? Do they talk about it like, oh, it was a big miss and we're still reeling from it? Or like, yeah, we did this thing and we learned that, but from that, we learned that, we could do this other thing better. Or we could accomplish this efficiency here. As a hiring manager, I'm often asking candidates, like, tell me about a failure that you encountered, which, not only to your point is sort of getting at how do they deal with failure? Are they going to tell me a story where it was like, well, this project failed, but it was all so-and-so's fault? Do they take any ownership of that? But beyond that, do they talk about what they learn, right? That's, I think, something, again, for job seekers in interviews, in any engagements, is always good to answer not just the articulated question, but the intrinsic question. So, if I'm being asked, tell me about a time that you failed, that's the question. I could just say, like, oh yeah, we tried to launch this project, but we were 4 weeks behind and it didn't meet client expectations. That's technically the answer to that question. But as a hiring manager, I want so much more than that. I want to hear why, in retrospect, why do you think it failed? What could you have done better? And then from that, how have you implemented those learnings into a more successful project? Like, the question wasn't, tell me about a successful project, but that's what you want to leave your interviewer with, right? Like, yeah, it failed. We all do. Here's how it happened, right? The star, right? Here was the situation. Here was the task. Here were the actions. Here was the results. But dive in on the results. Like, this project failed, but then we had a postmortem or a retro, or did some really deep soul searching. Like, well, in retrospect, I should have clarified this or budgeted my time more effectively. But what I learned from that was this. And then on the next project, I was able to get out in front of it. And because of that, we delivered, 2 weeks ahead of schedule, surpassed client expectations or stakeholder expectations. So, dive in as a hiring manager, as a candidate, around questions of grit. How are you going to deal with adversity? And talk about the learnings that you've gotten from failures. So answer those unarticulated questions. Go deeper on those questions.
It's interesting. You mentioned kind of the questions behind the question. That's not something I've really thought about before, but makes perfect sense. Almost seems like you'd have to have some level of emotional intelligence to know that that's not just the question, though. There's more behind it. Like, as a hiring manager, as a candidate, how do you develop that sense of emotional intelligence, or being able to kind of read between the lines? Is there a way to train that or develop that, do you think?
That's a great question. I think for me, it's come out of maybe a little bit of emotional baggage around my mother not always being clear with her expectations. We're not going to unpack that today. But I think that comes back to practicing an interview. Like, as a candidate, you are there to make a great impression on the hiring manager, as well as figure out if this is a role that you're really interested in a company. So think about, if you were the hiring manager, like, solve their pain. They want, as you were saying, someone that has grit, someone that's going to take onus upon themselves, find things that are broken and fix them, go deeper than just the task at hand. There's that great story I'm sure many of us have heard about a hiring or a manager who asked, like, 2 different people to get him some oranges. And, one candidate was like, I heard you say your wife needed those oranges. So I called your wife to see what she needed them for, so I could make sure that it was actually delivering upon the root of the request there and not just your interpretation of the request. So I think probably one thing to remember is that humans, like, people gonna people, we are all imperfect. We all have these inner monologues in our head that are, make perfect sense to us, but externally don't, right? Like, our communication powers fail us all, often and always. And so don't assume that what someone says is the surface of what they really need. That's their own, like, verbal limitations of what they're trying to think about. So ask questions. I think this comes, as a candidate interviewing, think about, what is this hiring manager trying to solve? And you can ask that question. That's a question I almost always ask when I'm being interviewed. Like, what are your current pain points? What do you think of, if you think about the person that you put in this role succeeding, what does that look like 90 days from now? And you don't have to wait till the end to ask your questions. As a hiring manager too, I'll start the interview with, like, before we go, or any questions, like, let me give you some context on the role. Is it a backfill? Is it a new role? Do we, have a really good definition of what this looks like? But I'll open that up to questions in the beginning, and tell them conversational, ask your questions at any time. But again, as a candidate, ask that question, dive into what your hiring manager is really looking for, so you can do your best to drop assumptions. And then when they answer you, speak to that. Like, okay, this is what success looks like. Fantastic. You have a new piece of information, act on it. Great. I can really see myself employing these skills or this experience to deliver on that 60 days, 90 days from now. But I think around the emotional intelligence, go into it knowing that people are not saying everything that they mean. Just, again, it's not necessarily they're trying to obfuscate. It's just imperfect powers of communication to dump out everything that's in our brain into understandable words for the other party. And just ask questions. Be curious. Did that answer your question? Why are you asking me that? What are you trying to get at? Don't assume that you understand intent, because that's the old idiom. Like, we judge ourselves by our intent, and we judge other people by their actions, but we don't know what their intent is unless we ask.
That's a great point. Yeah. I'm just thinking of ways that somebody could kind of practice that sort of thing. Because from a practical standpoint, I think some people innately are more open personality wise, and they maybe have some built-in better emotional intelligence, but not everybody has that. So, what do you do to hone that? And I would think, if you're thinking about interviewing at a place, we've mentioned kind of having your friends interview you. And by the way, they don't have to be in your chosen field, like you had mentioned.
That's right. Yeah.
But, actually, I had a similar conversation with another guest not long ago, where we were talking about even at the executive level, sometimes it helps to have a mentor that's, above your level, but not necessarily in the same industry.
Mm-hmm.
They can still provide a lot of insights. But, going back to, once you kind of have that person and they're able to interview you and maybe give you some insights that, somebody at your level might not have, you can ask them to ask you curveball questions that, kind of expand upon your answer. Ask them to ask clarifying questions and really dig in, because I think often the good stuff that comes out in an interview from both sides is the things that you dig past the surface and you get past the rehearsed answers. Right. So, and you can employ that too as somebody who's interviewing to learn more about the company. Often, if you ask a question about culture, for instance, their first, answer might be, "Oh, we work hard, play hard," or "Oh, we do get-togethers." They have something ready to go for that. But if you dig deeper and say, "Okay, well, how many?" You got to be careful about this, because people could be biased towards thinking that you may not want to work hard. But asking clarifying questions, how does the team get along and communicate? How many hours a week do people work, and do they generally find that's appropriate? How are people balancing work life and family life, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But yeah, like I said, you have to be kind of careful about that. But yeah, so that's just a thought there.
I think on the interviewee side too, if you get asked a curveball question, it's easy to say and harder to do, but don't panic. It's okay to say, especially if it's a technical interview, like, I don't know, but here's how I would find out, right? Like, pivot to a, just like with the failure question, like pivot to a strength. Nope, I haven't worked with that tool so much, but given how quickly I picked up this other tool, I'm pretty sure I could dive into some of our resources, hit my network, and come up to speed pretty quickly, kind of things.
Yeah. And to give yourself some more time, you can even say, "That's a really great question. Truth be told, I don't necessarily have the answer. Don't lie, don't fake it." I always tell people that. A lot of people do, and they don't get the job because
That's right. Your integrity is your currency.
Yeah. Yeah. Speaking of which, I did a LinkedIn post on that not long ago. What role would you say that integrity and authenticity have in the hiring process from either, a hiring manager's perspective or more the candidate side?
I think that it can be challenging to get out in an interview, like a 1 hour interview or, a couple sessions of interviews. As a hiring manager, you can ask that question. Tell me about it. Again, a behavioral question. Tell me about a time that you had to stick to your principles in face of adversity or in direct conflict with another stakeholder or your boss or anything like that. As a candidate, I have, this is what I would encourage folks to, like, whatever system you have, if it's written down in a notebook or a document on your computer, but prep your stories, prep your behavioral interview stories, the ones that will be coming. Tell me about a time that, again, tell me about a failure. Tell me about a time that you had to work cross-functionally. Think about these, because if you pre-think about them, and I'm not saying like have your rehearsed, memorized speech, that does not come across as authentic, but have the point that you want to make in mind so that you can get there, right? Like, think about going to the grocery store. You can take a bunch of different ways, but ultimately you'll arrive at the grocery store. That's how you can tell these stories. One of those questions for me as a hiring manager that I ask, and one that I'm prepared for as a candidate, is directly around that. Like, tell me about a time that you had to say no because somebody's asking you to do something that was against your values or against your code of integrity. So people might not have an example about that. Like, hopefully you've not been in a situation where you had to make a hard choice. But if you don't, then talk about what you would do. It's hard to get at an interview, but once that trust or that integrity is shaken, that's really hard to get back. Again, that's part of how I got my current job. My boss knew that I was new in the security field. But he knew that he could trust me because we had a pre-existing relationship. He'd seen how I operated before. And I do my best to show that every day. Like, in my current role, I'm privy to a lot of sensitive information, understandably, at a startup. And people know that. And they also know that I will not spill that. And so they don't ask. And that, keeps me from having awkward conversations, but I'm not afraid to say no. So, as a candidate, maybe think of ways to weave into your other answers how you stood up for what you felt was right. Sometimes if it's not an integrity question, show your flexibility. Like, well, I didn't really disagree, but that was the project the business felt was best, so I could disagree and commit. That's okay. If it is something that you're being asked to do something you think is immoral or illegal, questionable, talk about how you spoke up about that. And maybe it was resolved, maybe it wasn't. What did you do afterwards? Did you decide this is not an environment I feel comfortable being a part of? That can be okay. Did you decide, like, ultimately I'm going to go to HR, but I'm going to give the other parties a chance to speak up and make it right first? Tell that story. But yeah, if you can find a way to weave in these unanswered questions, like maybe you were asked about your use of Splunk. I keep coming back to Splunk. Maybe you're asked to talk about your use of Splunk. You can weave a story where you talk about, knowledge of the tool, how you've used it, and maybe a time that you had to speak up because you thought that, something wasn't right there. So make sure you're building upon these stories to get at the tech, the theory, the implementation, and the business context.
Excellent examples as always. We're coming up on time here. I know we could talk about a lot of other stuff, but got to ask you the last question I ask everybody. Is there anything that we're not talking about in the industry, but we should be, especially as it relates to hiring?
Yes, I'm sure there is. That's a great question. I think one of the things that we're not talking about is all the different. Well, we have kind of touched upon it, but all the peripheral roles, or all the roles that people might think are security, but actually are more, or maybe working more in tandem with legal or privacy specialists. I think we did talk about it, but it bears revisitation. Like, don't pigeonhole yourself as a candidate. Leave yourself open to those adjacent roles, to the starter roles, to the roles that are not your forever, but are your for now. And again, don't put yourself in a toxic situation. Like, we're not saying settle, for a toxic boss or a toxic environment, but you can pause in a role that is not your end destination, but is a stepping stone to getting there. And for hiring managers, I think look at those candidates, find candidates that are really excited to grow. Have those conversations with recruiters about, here's the personality or the mindset maybe that I'm looking for. The technical skills are on my wish list, but we can get them there. And make sure that you're talking to your team as well, so that everyone's on board. Like, hey, we're going to bring on a junior candidate. That means little work for all of us to train them up, to mentor them. So look for folks that are willing to take on that mentor mindset as well, so that you are meeting their expectations and you're not just like, here's a team member, you're going to have to teach them everything that they need to know and do your regular work. So again, I think that in the security field, there's a lot of focus on, I know I'm a broken record here, but there's a lot of focus on technical skills, and that's very important. Technical skills may get you the job. The non-technical skills will boost your career, will get you that promotion, will get you that next opportunity. So you cannot short shrift those. Keep working on those. Seek out opportunities to practice. Like you said, Pete, like with folks outside the field, you can practice that with anybody, with friends, people that know you, people that don't know you very well, and take the feedback.
Well, it's a great place to leave off. So appreciate all your input, Courtney, and great talking to you. And if people want to find you online, what's the best way to do so?
I would be happy to connect on LinkedIn. Courtney Higseth-Hans, got that maiden name in there. I'm not too hard to find. So yeah, reach out on LinkedIn. I'm always looking to speak at conferences too. That's a personal goal I have for myself. So if you see me at a conference, please say hi and give me some feedback on my talk, because I'd like to hear that too.
Awesome. Well, thanks for your time, Courtney, and thanks everybody.